The Spanish arrived in the early 1500s in the form of Conquistador Pedro de Alvarado. The short end of the story is the Spanish didn't know what they were doing in terms of agriculture. They effed things up.
Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
And I'm Dr. Erin.
You are exceptionally welcome to our conversation today about El Salvador, the Central American country that is this week's stop on the Colonizers World Tour. Very, very stoked. Now, before we get going on El Salvador, we need to know what we knew about El Salvador before we started. So, Erin, what do you bring to the conversation prior to Googling madly?
Sweet feck all, my friend. I knew its physical geographical location. I knew it was in Central America. Probably didn't even know where in Central America. If you just showed me a map without like names of countries, I probably wouldn't have been able to point to you which one was El Salvador. That's how little I knew about this place. How about yourself?
So, Theology Corner, I knew about Oscar Romero, Archbishop Oscar Romero, who is very famous within Latin American Catholic liberation theology, which we will talk about tomorrow, the next video, when we cover a biopic of him starring Gomez Adams, Raul Julia.
Raul Julia.
From 1989. But so I knew a little bit about him. I read some of his works when I was in seminary, and I could pick it out on a map simply because I have been to almost every other country in Central America, so I knew it was the one I hadn't been to.
Got it.
So, that was, beyond that, not a lot. I did remember that it wasn't great.
I forget what country were we on? Vietnam or something? Like, is another bad year for human rights in Vietnam. I just feel like every country we've done since then, you just insert the different country name.
Especially in Central and South America, we're going to hit this more and more, particularly around civil wars and American interventions in the 70s and 80s around communism. Yeah. That this is going to be a thing, and today is no exception. So, let's get to the map. Geography, as we mentioned, it is in Central America. For anyone who is not familiar, that's the thing that's between Mexico and South America. That's the connector. We make jokes of it, but one of the things we discovered living in Europe is that Central America as a concept has not made it kind of elsewhere in the world. So we wanted to be clear, this is in Central America. It borders the North Pacific Ocean. It's the only Central American country that does not have a border on the Caribbean Sea. And this is also important because it also means that tourism is going to be more difficult because a huge part of Central American tourism is cruise ships. And those cruise ships sail the Caribbean, not the Pacific. So that's a kind of point in its, just as to know. It's about the geographical size of New Jersey for anyone who is familiar with American geography, which probably means, my guess is it's like 4 hours to drive tip to tip, because that's about what New Jersey is. Currently, as of 2021, we've got about 6.5 million people living there, and it is very densely populated because it's the smallest country in land area in Central America, but it has like a massive population. It's a huge population density, especially around San Salvador, which is the capital. The language is officially is Spanish, and from my ear, listening to some of this, there is less of a dialect in El Salvador than in some other places. I understood a lot more from my basics, Mexican-American Spanish than I did in some other places we've been. And I didn't see any data on a dialect, so I don't know. I just, from colloquial, I could understand without subtitles a whole lot more than normal. There are some Amerindians who speak Nahuatl, but that is not an officially recognized, like, governmental language or anything. In terms of the ethnic and indigenous population, which as we get into demographics and some other stuff, Aaron will pick up in a few minutes, it's about 83% Mestizo, which is a friend of mine who grew up in Nicaragua once told me that Mestizo is the nice word for we have no idea where anybody comes from because too many people colonized us. And that's like, it's an ethnic group, but from his perspective, that was kind of to him what it means. 12% identify as white. This is all in 2007. And looking at a lot of the demographic shifts and upheavals in the last, 15 years, I'd be really curious to see what these numbers are now. But 2007 is the most recent set of data around this that the CIA World Factbook could give us. So that's what we've got. Now, we need to talk about currency. And I want you all to buckle your seatbelts because this thing is wild. So the fiscal policy in El Salvador pretty much came into effect in 1992 during the peace accords. And they kind of figured some things out. And they had the Colón, which was okay, but like not loved. I don't really understand. But then in 2001, what they decided to do was also make the United States dollar legal tender. All of the formal accounting became done in US dollars. And the Colón was completely phased out by 2004. The public do not seem happy about this, even to this day, to be honest, because wages stayed the same, but all the prices increased, which is lame. I mean, that's just lame. So it's not really seemingly super stable. It's a huge export-based culture. Economy. We'll get to that in a minute. But then, in June of 21, their new president, who there's lots of feelings about this gentleman. You can feel free to refer to the living Google Doc for a lot of reports about people's feelings about this guy. He decided to make Bitcoin legal tender. And I think you can tell from my tone of voice that I find that dubious. I'm not the only one, by the way. The International Monetary Fund also finds that dubious. It's a choice. And I am skeptical of Bitcoin's promised revolution, where it's going to be the bank of the people and blah, blah, blah. I totally agree that bank accounts are problematic for under-resourced people and that their regulations are really, really, really problematic for people to get into banking and do kind of all those other things. I'm not saying the system is great, but I'm not convinced the solution is something that is not tied to any external currency or external markets. Like, to me, Bitcoin just fluctuates too much for it to be the solution to poverty.
Right.
The way it's being presented now. There is a fascinating video, however, in our notes, I believe from Vice. I could be wrong. The reporter visited a neighborhood on the coast of El Salvador that is entirely Bitcoin. Like, you can't really even use dollars. And he interviews people how they feel about it, how it works, how it all goes. Cannot recommend it enough, especially if you, like us, don't really understand Bitcoin and aren't necessarily in a hurry to. But, like, literally, when I found this, I found this thing about the currency. I was like, Aaron, we have to learn Bitcoin.
And I still didn't, but I found another one as well that was from Al Jazeera English. That is also in the show notes that I didn't watch yet, though I probably will. That's about Bitcoin, and it's like 26 minutes long. So, like, if you want to really dive into El Salvador and Bitcoin, we found a source. I haven't watched it yet, but I will. But I'm still murky on Bitcoin.
And I've done a little bit of conversation. Thank you, Clubhouse. There's lots of Bitcoin rooms and cryptocurrency rooms. So I went into a couple and I just asked, like, hey, give me the elevator pitch for how this is going to help women. Give me the elevator pitch for how this helps kids. And they gave them to me. I'm not entirely sure I believe them, but, like, it's out there. And that's just my skepticism about such a highly fluctuating thing being the ladder out of poverty. I'll just name it. So Will, if you are a crypto expert, please
help us.
And also, come on and talk. We'd love to talk to somebody who knows crypto. We don't, obviously. The system of government, by the way, is a presidential republic. The name is from the conquistadors, which it was at one point like 15 words long, and then we just narrowed it to El Salvador, which is the savior, because why would conquistadors use one name when they could use 9? And in the legacy of the conquistadors, it's a hugely Christian country, mostly Catholic. And when you learn about Archbishop Oscar Romero, that will not surprise you that the Catholicism hasn't continued. We still have a decent sized Protestant population. This is especially from nonprofits and churches that have gone down and started missions down there. Some things like that. The Catholic Church has been very active, even in the peace negotiations for a long time. Actually, one of the most high profile murders during the Civil War of Americans was 4 nuns that had been down there for a long time doing community development work. There is a growing, just like in so much of Central and South America, this is not abnormal, a growing Pentecostal and evangelical movement. A lot of this is due to the internet and American evangelical money, and how those things are coming in. It is unlike a lot of other places in the United States where most evangelicalism is Protestant. In Central and South and Southern Africa, we are seeing more Catholic evangelicalism, and that's fascinating to me personally for a whole host of reasons, because everything is fascinating to me when it has to do with religion. But that's El Salvador in a nutshell, really quick barn burner of a demographic tour. But we got to talk just really quick, the economy. Can I tell you, because this is my Jeopardy fun fact, so preview. Like 16% of their economy is of their exports are just t-shirts. Just t-shirts, not even clothing.
Just t-shirts, yeah.
Just t-shirts. I have so many questions. Anyway, over to you, Erin, for the rest of the economic forecast.
Yes. I do want to say in the topic of religion, one of the things I found interesting was several videos exploring the rise of evangelical Catholicism within former gang members.
Oh, yes, because of the prisons, for sure. Yeah, that
prisons.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a high conversion rate in prisons because former gang members are treated better if they're Christian. And then they're put in like job programs when they leave and when
things
they
like
leave.
that.
Yeah. So we'll get into the gang problem when I get to colonization. But MS-13 and something 18.
There was MS-18 too. I think it might legit just be MS-18.
Yeah. They're 2 big gangs in El Salvador. We'll get to that. But yeah, that was a fascinating thing. There's a couple videos in our living Google Doc about that as well. For the economy, it's the 3rd largest economy in Central America. As Dr. Kristen said, high export of t-shirts. Long ago, that wasn't the case. Lots of coffee, which I'll get to in colonization. Indigo, which makes sense for textiles. And cacao beans. Remittances are a huge part of the economy in El Salvador, just like we learned in Puerto Rico. Top industries, food processing, beverages, textiles, all that jazz.
No, it wasn't Puerto Rico. It was Cuba.
It was Cuba. You're right.
I mean, I'm sure remittances are a huge part of Puerto Rico as well, but it's not reported on because it's the U.S. dollar, blah, 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 blah. But we did learn about it in Cuba, yeah.
We learned a lot more about it in Cuba. I stand corrected. 38% of the population is below the poverty line. There's a huge, like, we don't have enough time to get into the intersection of violence and government and economy and conflict that has produced the current circumstances in El Salvador. But that's a whole hell of a lot of people below the poverty line. 70% of the population have not finished high school. So again, you're not getting great jobs coming out of that. For some demographics, one of the things I learned that I found very interesting was that they are Salvadorans. Not
Correct.
El Salvadorans,
Nope.
not Salvadorians.
Nope.
There's no I. Salvadorans.
Mm-hmm.
That is correct. Or in Espanol, Salvadoreño.
Yes.
Which there's a fantastic mini documentary that we watched by a Canadian Salvadoran person named Will Ramirez. I mean, you can look up a whole lot of stats about El Salvador that aren't great. It has the world's highest homicide rate. An average of 18 people are killed or disappeared every day, which is a lot. 95% of the surface water in the country is undrinkable. 10% of people don't have access to drinking water at all. The people with no access to drinking water pay 300% more for water than the people that do have access.
Cool.
It's a very dangerous place for environmental activists. If you watch in our Living Google Doc, our friends at Geography Now talk a lot more about the specific physical geography, but there's a lot of climate issues happening there.
So many.
Deforestation. They're on this like fascinating plate action in the globe. They have volcanoes. There's a lot happening. There's a lot happening in El Salvador. For human rights, like we said with Vietnam, like we said with Cuba, it's not a pretty picture. 33% of the population has internet access. That's very low.
And let me be really clear. That is also, because I think this is really important in times of COVID when we're having this conversation. Lots of people might have, and this is a Bitcoin thing, lots of people might have smartphones and access to the internet through data.
Yeah.
When we're talking about internet statistics, because this is the US too, we're not talking about people who have access to smartphones. Right. We're talking about how people who have access to wired internet in their homes. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's an important designation, because especially if we're asking people to be entrepreneurs or students or attend meetings, data on your smartphone is notoriously terrible. So it's not actually a consistent resource. I wanted to make that point when we talk about internet access, because a lot of these videos you see people carrying smartphones, and I could see people being like, but what?
Yeah.
That's not internet access.
We all know, cell phone data is expensive, and so it's cost prohibitive. So people don't access what they would if they had wired access in their homes, because they're conserving their data, or they can't afford, the bigger data packages, all that jazz. So it's a huge part of economic inequity as well. Yeah. It's not great for women in El Salvador. My Jeopardy fact isn't one of them isn't a fun one, and it's about their comprehensive total abortion ban. They're one of 3 countries in Central America and one of 24 in the world with a total abortion ban, even in cases of rape and incest. Yep. Medical professionals can face 6 to 12 years for helping. Family members can get 2 to 5 years for assisting family members. Abortion under the 1997 Penal Code is a 2 to 8 year sentence, with aggravated homicide a 30 to 50 year sentence. I don't have a lot for that. We've been talking a lot in this country about laws being passed in the state of Texas and elsewhere restricting humans' access to healthcare and abortion. So it's not great in El Salvador for the ladies. We'll get more to that in my Jeopardy fact. For our queer friends, sorry folks, if you thought that was the part where I was going to say it all turned around. No. Same-sex marriage and adoption are illegal. Homosexuality is legal, but quote,
it's... Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's legal in that it's not illegal. So, like, it just doesn't appear anywhere in the penal code.
Yeah.
Like, it's not actually blatantly legal.
There's no protections. Like, I think that's one of the distinctions that kind of, like, international human rights community make, right? Yeah. Between countries where it's like, sure, it's not illegal, but do they protect against workplace discrimination and, like, all this kind of stuff? Like, if they don't and they're in this weird, like, in-between, that's not super helpful. Yeah. Lots of LGBT people, according to our friends at Human Rights Watch, face torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, excessive use of force, illegal arbitrary arrests, and other forms of abuse, mostly by public security agents, but also by security forces, the police and the army. There's a couple documents and videos in our show notes about queer folks fleeing El Salvador and seeking asylum in the United States because they are being persecuted for their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. A lot of them flee, and it's not a safe place to be a person who appears to be sex or gender diverse or divergent from the heteronormative perceived normal. So it's not looking great in El Salvador. How did they get to not great, you might ask me? I would like to tell you the history of colonization. Big thanks to El Prof's History and Politics channel for their brief political history of El Salvador, with which I took a lot of this information from. Y'all check out the video. He does like those cool drawing things and tells you all about this stuff, even more than I'm going to. The area that became El Salvador was originally populated by the Mayan peoples. The peoples, P-I-P-I-L, people moved in around the 11th century, and they had a very similar culture to the Aztec with Mayan influences. So there's a lot of ruins still around El Salvador, which makes it pretty cool. The Spanish arrived in the early 1500s in the form of conquistador Pedro de Alvarado. The short end of the story is the Spanish didn't know what they were doing in terms of agriculture. They effed things up without crop rotation. Indigo was their biggest crop for a long time, and then it transitioned to coffee. But not until the 19th century did they jump on that crop rotation train. So they have a lot of economic and climate change issues from overcropping, not rotating, deforestation, etc.
Can I tell you why why the coffee took over so much? Are you going to cover that? Because this is something I actually know.
You can. Work away.
Okay. So it's a guy from Manchester, England.
Okay.
Kid you not. So there's a book review on the channel, on our sister channel, all about this. It's literally called Coffee Land. But it was a guy from Manchester, England, who was like, not going to make anything of himself in Manchester in the 1800s, got on a boat, showed up in El Salvador, realized that they weren't making as much money out of coffee as they could. And so built the entire coffee empire of El Salvador, like himself, and put only like 13 to 14 families with all the wealth and power, so coffee both built the economy of El Salvador and destroyed the land of El Salvador. Fascinating book, but white guy from Manchester.
Yeah. Raise your hand if you're shocked with that one, kids. So we get to the 19th century, backtracking a little bit from the coffee, which I'll get to again. The agriculture took all the communal land from the indigenous people. They instituted a hacienda system, which took a lot of the land and then forced the indigenous people to become migrant workers. It leads to a whole lot of issues about economic instability, job viability, all that kind of jazz. Napoleon jumps in there and ends kind of the Spanish control around Latin America. So we get a bunch of independence movements. There was this really fascinating, briefly lived alliance with Mexico, where like all of Mexico and Central America was this like big happy family. It lasted like a year. But then they joined the United Provinces of Central America in 1821. El Salvador was like, yeah, this is cool, but we'd really like to be annexed by the United States because our friends like Cuba and the Philippines, like they're going to get annexed eventually. We'd like to get on this U.S. train. So they went to the United States in 1822 and they were like, would you like to annex us? And the U.S. was like, no. Meh. So El Salvador went back to being part of the Federal Republic of Central America. They wrote a constitution in 1824. It lasted for 15 years. It was this whole thing. But it created this really long-lasting legacy in El Salvador with the policies that were formed during the Republic, which is really important to how the government kind of does and doesn't operate in the remaining 150 years. So a lot of these policies were the elimination of communal lands, again, for agriculture, and the oligarchies of the coffee industry, laws against vagrancy that forced people into working in the hacienda system, repression of rural unrest, which always goes well, and the occasional military conflict with their neighbors Guatemala and Honduras. So all of this was made worse with the introduction of coffee in the 1850s from our friend from Manchester. From the statistics about this are just crazy, y'all. From the latter part of the 19th century through the 20th century, most Salvadoran presidents were both military generals and major coffee growers. I mean, that just sounds like a recipe for success.
I mean, like, this has to be where we get the Juan Valdez stereotype joke. Like,
I mean, by the 20th century, 95% of El Salvador's income derived from coffee exports. 95%. But only 2% of that was controlled by Salvadorans. 2% of that wealth was controlled.
And that 2% was like 14 families.
Yeah, it was like these oligarchies that were set up by the Manchurian dude.
Yeah.
So this was a period called the Coffee Republic, which lasted until 1931, when there was a Great Depression. And the price
You may have heard of it.
You may have heard of it. The price of coffee absolutely tanked. And El Salvador was like, shit, what now?
Oh, we should have been doing diversification.
Oh,
yikes on trikes.
We shouldn't have based our entire economy off of the export of one thing.
And also, in case you were wondering, the reason they can't do indigo anymore is they overharvested that too.
Yeah, they overharvested everything.
They overharvested that too, because indigo is made from something called a logwood tree, which used to grow all over the place and now only grows in Mexico. Ask me how I know that in the comments.
We would like a separate discourse on logwood trees and the Yucatan Peninsula. We've got you. We've got you covered. The 20th century is nothing but sunshine and rainbows for El Salvador. They have a coup culture, much like our friends in Fiji and pretty much everywhere else.
So many coups.
A long history of killing the indigenous people.
Who also, by the way, sound like total badasses. One of the videos, I think it might have been Geography Now, they were like, so the Pupil people, like the Spanish showed up and they were like, nah. And
yeah. Totally, they just took all their guns.
Just took the guns and like ran them out and like, I mean, not that any other indigenous people are not badasses, but there's a certain like swagger that comes with nah.
Like we live on the sides of volcanoes. Don't
I'm sorry. Like,
don't come at me with your
you don't scare me,
conquistador.
white people with fire sticks. Like we're good.
Yeah.
Anyway, Pupils, 2 thumbs way up. We got to learn more about them.
We do have to learn more about them. So the 20th century, there's a lot of military control in the Salvadoran government. Lots of coups up until 1979. We get some liberal gains in the 1960s, which the military hates, and so more coups. So by the time we get to the end of the 1970s, people are like, you know what's a great idea? Revolution. Because electoral change isn't working. The military's not letting us do it. The biggest group that emerges and then is a part of the subsequent civil war is the FMLN. I keep wanting to say FMLA, which
Me
is...
too, and the whole time, which is the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act in the United States.
Family and Medical Leave Act. Yeah. That's why I said it so slowly. FMLN. Formed in 1980 and kicked off a big old civil war. The United States, guess what side we were on, kids? Not the side of the FMLN.
And why weren't we? Why
weren't we? Because they were communists.
The
FMLN were socialists who wanted like equal distribution of resources. I wonder why.
They weren't even communists, honestly. Like they weren't China. They weren't anyway.
But we had, I think, was it Honduras that had like a communist government? Yeah. Somebody right near them had a communist government take over in the 70s, and the Red Scare was super big.
Oh, for sure. And this is the domino theory again. And yeah, all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
All that jazz, the domino policy where it's like, well, if we let it communist or something adjacent take control, it'll spread everywhere and then we'll all die. Yeah. So we gave them almost $1 million a year in military aid for the entire 1980s. Reagan, was like, communism down with communism, up with military training.
Not I am never a defender of Reagan, literally ever in life, but I want you to know that it is Carter who kicked this off to viewers.
Oh,
this isn't like this This is the United States.
Carter kicked it off, and he was going to start scaling it back, and then Carter lost the election, and Reagan was like, ratcheted right back up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we get a series of very corrupt governments. In the 80s, Duarte, whom you may have heard of, presided for a couple years there in the mid-80s, so that didn't help the Salvadorans' case. The FMLN was still cracking in the late 1980s. They took over the capital of San Salvador, and we learned something that struck me as very familiar sounding, that even with a decade of U.S. training and $2 billion U.S. dollars funding the military aid, the Salvadoran army could not hold back the militia groups. I would insert a rant about Afghanistan here, but we don't have the time. But just so you can see the parallels between U.S. intervention, military aid and training, and the inability for these groups to hold back militia groups.
There's also the Vietnam of it all.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
there's always...
Our point here is that history doesn't just repeat itself; it carbon copies itself.
Especially when you have the same policies that you don't change.
You don't change.
That makes it pretty easy to keep repeating itself. So we get to the ceasefire in 1992. Bloody civil war, over 75,000 people dead, loads of displaced and migrant folks.
So many asylum seekers, yeah.
So many asylum seekers. We get a huge population of Salvadoran migrants in the United States and Canada. But they've reached this stalemate where the army can't defeat the FMLN and the FMLN can't defeat the army. Very similar to what happened in Northern Ireland as well in the same time period.
Yeah.
So the ceasefire and negotiations and accords bring in a lot of progressive changes, but the economic growth is what really struggles. Fits and starts through the 2000s, and then, global recession in 2008 didn't help.
Remember, at this point, they're using the U.S. dollar almost exclusively by 2008 as well. So remember this.
So that's a huge part of the engagement with the recession and the impact of the recession in El Salvador. There's a huge legacy of the Civil War, which kind of bleeds through everything that happens there. The gang situation, a lot of the migrants that fled during the Civil War a lot of them landed in Los Angeles, where their young people were influenced by the gang culture in Los Angeles at the time, formed these gangs, MS-13 and MS-18. Eventually, loads of Salvadoran migrants were deported back to El Salvador, including a lot of the leaders of these gangs, and thus they continued the gang activity in El Salvador and other parts of Central America and Mexico. So right now in El Salvador, they are currently dealing with a horrific combo of drugs, gang war, corruption, the legacy of the very bloody and divisive Civil War, economic instability, and climate change.
Oh, and then COVID.
And then the COVID. They've recently elected a millennial president, the youngest president ever in El Salvador, Bukele, who ran on a kind of progressive stance, was affiliated with the FMLN, but was then separated himself from them because he critiqued them. But he's got an authoritarian streak running through his veins, and some not great stuff has happened in his year and a half in power.
And he's the Bitcoin dude.
He's the Bitcoin dude. He's reacting really strongly to the gang wars and the violence, which we've seen. There's a lot of political momentum with millennials right now in El Salvador. And who knows what's going to happen. They need investments. They need jobs. They need revenue and stability. And we're not sure if they're going to get it. But boy, I mean, for a place the size of New Jersey.
It's been a time for them.
It's a fascinating 200 years since colonization. I
mean, my gosh. So we will say, as we look at the economic forecast, Haynes, who you will be familiar with, Americans as making as Michael Jordan's spokes thing for a long time, making mostly underwear and t-shirts. They have just done a massive infrastructure like investment in El Salvador, right on the outskirts of San Salvador. And from what I'm reading, they're essentially trying to build a suburb.
Nice.
And pour into their Haynes jobs, the whole nine. And they look like it might even be close to an El Salvadoran living wage. Okay, that would be radical. Haynes is not the only one. Jockey is also looking at things down there. There is the El Salvadoran government, from what I can see from manufacturing websites and trade publications, are putting all of their eggs in the textile manufacturing basket and are trying to get as many American companies to El Salvador as possible. Mm-hmm. Many are there already, obviously. There has been a sweatshop culture. That's another piece that this new president is like, well, no. If you're coming, you're going to come and you're going to pay us. You're going to pay us okay.
Yeah.
What his okay is and what people's okay are may be different, but it does. But their regulations seem to be, from my research, more attuned into human rights than, say, Bangladesh's. So it's going to be an interesting, I mean, which is a low bar, but still, like, let's give us a little bit of credit here, El Salvador. So it could very much be in the after times. If they can increase the textile exports, it could really help. But tech is not going to be a thing there. They don't have the infrastructure, that kind of stuff, but they definitely have the infrastructure on the ports to get textiles to Los Angeles, which is really what they're doing now. So that little bit, I did fall down a textile manufacturing rabbit hole because I was just so fascinated. So there's some stuff in the show notes about it.
Yeah. So speaking of things you were fascinated by, what are your Jeopardy facts? Jeopardy fun facts time.
Fun facts time. I mean, definitely for me, the 16% t-shirt thing just boggled my mind. That it wasn't even, I mean, that's so specific. It's just so specific.
Yeah.
And then also that the largest number of Palestinian people, like outside of Palestine, one of the largest groups of them is in El Salvador. That was fascinating. And then I learned
El Salvador is one of the few places in the world that recognizes the Palestinian state.
Yeah. And
okay,
cool.
Okay.
2 thumbs way up. So loved that, thought that was fascinating. And then I'll say finally, I did learn so much from the Coffee Land book.
Nice.
Utterly, I'm a coffee drinker, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to read the book to understand some of it. And I got the Colombian perspective on coffee world domination and what it did to their economy. But I had no idea that El Salvador was in that picture at all, truly, until we started this research project. And so I learned a lot about soil depletion with coffee plants. And what I honestly felt like I was reading scripts to the HBO show Succession, like the incredible amount of drama around family ownership of land and everything else. Yeah. The book lost me a little bit, but the writing lost me a little bit, I should say, which I cover in the review. But the story of this all was a very important and gripping one, especially for any of us who drink coffee.
Yeah, and this whole issue of like land acquisition.
Oh my gosh.
That goes way back to like cacao and indigo and the agriculture and the way that the land was communally owned and then taken from those communities is a huge part. And then you've got like suppression of unionization attempts in the 1920s and like the labor movement and the progressive left socialist leaning low income like working class, and then all the people that have made money off of exploiting and oppressing that group of people. It's like it's the perfect storm for economic instability. And then the Spanish of it all, the colonization of it all, where they don't know how to rotate crops.
Yeah.
Spain.
So many questions for Spain.
I know. They weren't good at it.
They weren't good at it. They're very, very good at paella, though, so we'll give them that. Your Jeopardy fun fact, I know at least one of them has to do with reproductive justice. So tell us what's going on.
Big fans of reproductive justice. Yeah, so I have two. I have one that's happy and one that's sad. So we'll do the sad one first and then end on the happy one. So the sad one is that when I was talking about abortion and their abortion ban earlier in demographics, what I didn't mention, intentionally so I could mention it now, is that women who have miscarriages or stillbirths fall under the category of aggravated murder. So we have women who are incarcerated without recourse to legal advice, facing up to 40 years imprisonment for having a miscarriage. Which is not, if you aren't aware of anatomy, not something women can control, usually. Hardly ever. So that was the thing that kind of broke me in half yesterday while I was researching. There's a couple of videos in the show notes talking to a woman who, and they don't have sexual health education there. So people don't know what's happening to their bodies. They wake up in a pile of blood on the floor. They go to the hospital and a medical professional turns them in. And there was one woman who was turned in at the hospital, arrested after she miscarried, and didn't go home for 7 years. Because she was convicted of aggravated murder. So,
that's so horrific and so hard for me to handle that my only response is cynically wow, that's really impressive. They have that much room in their prisons
that are overrun with gang members. Cool.
Okay. I can't even.
I know.
Tell me the fun one, please. Tell me the fun one.
The fun one has to do with our friends in the textile industry. Again, I found another fantastic video. I think it was from PBS NewsHour. It was PBS NewsHour. About a man named Rodrigo Bolanos, who runs the League Collegiate Outfitters, which is a t-shirt producing factory. They do almost everything for NCAA schools.
Cool.
So their factory is all these banners of Clemson, UCLA, Notre Dame. He will hire people if they don't have an education, but he will not keep them if they don't get an education. He's an intentional second chance employer, much like our beloved parent company, Abbey Colors. Whoop whoop. He hires former gang members. He hires women who've come out of prison for being jailed for having a miscarriage. He helps them get an education, so much so that he has built a 2-year college into the factory.
Yes, buddy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Rodrigo is all over it. So he helps get them skills and then gives them jobs. So he's opening up this entrepreneurial aspect where now he has people doing tech stuff in his factory that they started out sewing. He intentionally hires people with disabilities, people who are wheelchair bound, people who are blind, but they can feel they're sensitized. One guy that was blind, his fingers are super sensitized from reading Braille his whole life, and so he's really good at finding irregularities in the cloth.
Oh.
I was but a lot of factories won't hire people with disabilities or differently abled folks. So that one, I felt I was really happy to watch that and to be good people. There's good people in El Salvador, as there are everywhere. The majority of people just want to live their lives and love their country. And so to get to see glimpses of that when all the stories you can find on the internets almost about El Salvador are very sad.
That's amazing. I'm in love with this. I have to go find the video myself now. Oh, so excited.
So it's a feel good. It's a feel good one. So definitely watch it after we're done, and then you'll end El Salvador on a happier note.
Amazing. Speaking of where we're going next, as we mentioned already, on the next video on the playlist, we are going to be talking about the 1989 movie Romero, which is about Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was killed in all of this.
In the Civil War. He was killed in the Civil War.
He was killed in the Civil War, but how do you even unpack why things even happen anymore? Because there's such a long legacy. Anyway, he is a world famous figure in religious peacemaking, and somebody that we are interested to watch. Also starring Raul Julia, who we both know as Gomez. Adams. And so this is going to be interesting. And one of the fun things that's always true about watching movies from the 80s is that it's always differently paced. So I am positive that I will be like taking a nap at some point. Even if it's a really good movie, because I'm so used to aughts paced stuff. So anyway, no matter what, I promise you we will have a ton to say about Romero. And so we will see you then.
Take care, everybody.